A man lived a rather wild life. He was certainly not living a Christian life or on the straight and narrow. And so when he died, there was a lot of debate about where he should be buried. His family wanted him buried in the church cemetery, but the minister, who was kind of a tyrant himself, said, no, I don't think that that's possible because of the life that he lived. We can't honor him in that way. And so he said, bury him outside the gates of the cemetery. That's where his grave will be. And so that happened, and years later, one of the daughters came. The minister was gone himself, and one of the daughters came to visit the man's grave, and she noticed that it was not outside or in the place where it was. It was not where it was before. It was not outside the fence. And so she went to the caretaker who had been there for a long time, and she said, what happened to my father's grave? So he very graciously took her to a spot, and it was in the gates of the church cemetery. And she said, well, why did you move my father's grave? And the caretaker said, I didn't move, and we did not move your father's grave, but rather we moved the fence to include him in it. Our gospel reading today very much speaks of that. Actually, both readings, the first reading and the gospel, speak about fences and about where our fences are at. For instance, in the first reading from Isaiah is very welcoming. Isaiah speaks about foreigners praising God and that his house is a house of prayer open to all peoples. So to all peoples, so there's not a discrimination that goes on. It's kind of a wide open fence and a gate that welcomes people. In the gospel reading today, we have an interesting exchange with Jesus and this Canaanite woman. You see, she was a Canaanite, so that meant that she was kind of outside the house of Israel. She was considered to be impure because of the religious practices that she was involved with, because of her heritage. Nothing else. Nobody had ever spoken to her probably, but she was branded. So she was branded. We don't have anything to do with that woman. Jesus' exchange is kind of heated there, really. I mean, he was trying to make a point. This is almost a parable in the making. The exchange about being here for that lost sheep of Israel, of which she really was not of Israel. She said, well, I'll even eat the scraps that are given to the dogs. She really was desperate. She was persistent. She had in deep within her a miracle of faith that was occurring, and all the others had placed her outside the fence. But Jesus brought her in because of the faith that she exhibited, because of how she was relating to him in terms of belief. He noticed that, and so his point was made. Maybe the exchange was kind of heated there in the beginning where he didn't really respond in any way to her because he was making that point. He was kind of leading everyone else on. And they were probably wondering, well, what's he going to do next? Well, he allowed her to have the gift of healing for her daughter. Pope Francis often speaks about fences, different language, in a different way, and about how we are called upon to be more inclusive in our own lives. One of his first trips, I believe it actually was his first trip, was to a little island off the coast of Italy, where on an annual basis, hundreds, thousands of people from Africa and the Middle East go through the Mediterranean, they travel the sea. Many of them do not make it, they die. And so some make it to that island, and it's their gateway into Europe. And so for Francis, when he went there, he was making a point of, we have to welcome the stranger. We have to remember those who died, who gave their lives maybe in search of a better life in another country or another place. So he asked for a sense of welcome, and he used a term that really is something very important for us to know, and that is he spoke about a globalization. We all know globalization is, the world becoming one world, culturally and in business and in interaction and socially. Just with communication today, it's amazing what we can do. So Pope Francis talked about a globalization of indifference. That it seems like the more we kind of have a world where communication is very present, the less we care about one another. And he uses examples, but think now about tonight when you go home, and if you were to turn on the news, you will hear a lot about conflicts in other places. It's very sad, actually. We hear about war in Iraq where, Christians, people of our own faith, are persecuted. Do we care? We hear about Syria where there's civil war where over 50,000 people have died. It's a conflict. It's very complicated. But lives are lost. We hear about a virus in Africa of people who, every day, people dying. People who are someone's mother, someone's father, someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's brother or sister. And maybe because it's so far away, it's like, oh, that's like in another world. Okay, well, they'll kind of solve it themselves. And I don't know, Jesus himself couldn't solve and make peace in the Middle East. And these conflicts are very deep-rooted, and certainly, though, we can pray for the people there. We can hope that, we're very smart people. We have a lot of smart people in the world today. How come we can't come to terms and show an example of peace, an example of love, so that fences kind of disappear in that way? We have a situation, really it's close to our hearts in our own country, and that is we have a 1,954-mile border with Mexico. It's a long border. It's one of the most crossed borders in all of the world, if not the most. There's over 300 million legal good crossings a year that go back and forth. So it's kind of an interesting concept because many people go back and forth for work. There's kind of like megalopolises of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez and San Diego and Tijuana, and there's kind of like that living in conjunction there, even though they're different countries and people work in different places, and they're able to operate in that way. But there's an incredible amount of sadness on that 1,954-mile border. Because there's many people whose lives are lost. And they're lost because they're treated cruelly. They're treated in a way maybe that they're searching for a better life for their family. Maybe they want to be reunited with their family. They're trying to make their life right. But very sadly, their lives may end in that peril. People that come from islands to Florida who, the boat capsizes. Guess what? That life is someone's life. I know we may not know them, may not speak someone's language, we may be different than them, but it's still a life. And at some point, probably one of our ancestors came here to this country from somewhere else. I have a great-grandfather who came to this country in the early 1900s. And he came in the way that he was supposed to come. He came over through Ellis Island. And he was treated with not a lot of dignity. His name in his old country was Hussar. Well, the people at Ellis Island couldn't pronounce it. So they said, well, from this point forward, you're going to be known as Harry. In other words, I don't care what your name was before, because now you're getting a new name. It's pretty sad. A name which is precious, a name given to us by our parents. And this is probably a situation when it comes to borders and people from other countries coming to our country. It's a process that needs reform. That's the bottom line with it. It needs a reform. Again, we're smart people. How do we make sure that our fences are not cruel fences? That our fences make sense for reasons, that we see lives as precious, that we see all lives as very precious, because, my friends, we're called upon to build a culture of life, not a culture of death. And in building a culture of life, we promote the dignity of life at beginning of life issues and end of life issues. But guess what? All life in between. So that means that this morning across your breakfast table, you may have had a very obnoxious teenager eating Cheerios. And maybe there was an exchange that happened there, and it wasn't great, but you discipline, you hold accountable, you kind of work with that person, you respect their life, and you love them. When Jesus looked at the Canaanite woman, He loved her, and he saw the potential in her. And so he treated her with dignity. You know, I hope that one day when we all get to the gate of heaven, I hope that that's a fence that we're able to get across. Because I think we all want to be on the right side of it, and that's God's side. So our actions personally, you know, just not only global big situations, but personally, should also reflect our love for Christ and that model of that behavior. I know it was the first week of school this past week here in Seminole County, and our parish school as well tomorrow starts with Orange County. You know, I wonder how many students have already built a fence in their classroom and thought, you know what, that's going to be the unpopular kid this year. I'm not going to have anything to do with that one of my peers. Very sad. Maybe they're branded already. Maybe they're branded that they're going to be the problem child or not the smart one. It's kind of a shame when we do that, because we have to be able to lift one another up, be able to expand that border. Sometimes we put fences up, and guess what? We're the only ones on one side of the fence and everybody else is on the other side. You know, when that happens is when you're talking to somebody and they're on their cell phone and they're sitting there and they're playing a game or they're texting, and you know, you're present to the person, but you know what? They're not real present to you back. So that person who's there, they put up a fence. It's pretty sad, actually. It's more than sad. Do you know what? It's rude. And it's really beyond rude, because some people don't understand what that is, so I'll say it in a different language. It's #rude. So we put fences up in many ways, and certainly in many different places in our own lives. In our gospel today, our readings, they call us to maybe think about where we've placed them. Good boundaries make for good relationships, and I preface it with that. There's always good process, and we have to be able to respect process for what it is. But first and foremost, we have to respect the human person. As we begin this week, maybe we can evaluate some of the borders we've put up, some of the fences, and maybe think about who's on the other side. Why are they there? And maybe we can move that fence in order to be a little more inclusive, to be a little more loving, and to be more like Christ.